Welcome, everyone. I am really delighted and grateful that you made the time to be here today. This session is the 8th in a series of 8. So, this is the last session of this series. And we are indeed at the end of the series. And I want to say thank you to everyone that joined us on this journey, whether you were present in our live sessions or listening to the recordings. And I hope that there is something that you take from these sessions that will make you look at the world just a little differently as a coach and as a human being. I want to start with a simple presencing exercise. It is a straightforward technique that you can use in everyday life for yourself. I know you would like to go into a nice, deep, but unlike the presencing exercises that we've done in the past, this is a conscious exercise without trance induction, or not. So I'm going to ask you if you would be comfortable keeping your eyes open for the duration of this exercise. And I want us to start and just by stretching out your body. And you can do this while seated, but you are welcome to get up and really stretch. Stretch out your arms. Move your body in a way that stretches your legs, your back, your neck, and your arms again. And I will give you a moment to do that. And when you're ready, settle back in your chair. Give yourself a moment and relax. Feel how your chair supports your legs and your back. Let your weight settle into the chair and feel the comfort of that almost sinking feeling. And take a deep breath in and out. And take another deep breath in and out. And in a moment, I will ask you to breathe according to a count. And I would like you to follow me, and I will count for you. And I will ask you to breathe in for 4 counts and out for 6 counts. So let's start. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And rest. And while your breath is returning to normal, remember to keep breathing just a little deeper than you usually would. We will do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method to bring you to presence. And I know you may be wondering what this method is. And it's a good thing to wonder. This is such a simple technique, and it means that you can learn this easily or without any effort at all. It's totally up to you. I will explain it as we go because your senses are an essential tool in coming to presence. You will use your senses to list things you notice around you. And you don't have to say it out loud. You can just notice in your mind. Can you not? As you're sitting there, listening to me, starting to notice your senses, I want you to list mentally 5 things you can see around you. Maybe things you don't always pay attention to. Maybe something small, something large, something familiar, something out of place, something new or old. And then moving on to 4 things you can touch from where you are sitting. Maybe something soft, something close, something warm or cold. And then listening and hearing 3 sounds. Something near, something far. And I wonder how your ears feel having heard such things. Almost there, but not yet. Smelling 2 smells. Become aware of it now. And then 1 taste that you can taste in this moment. That's right. Before we end this exercise, just notice how good you feel right now. And take another deep breath in and out. You are relaxed and present. And 1 more breath in and out. And be here now. Welcome. Last week, I was talking to an old friend, John, who reminded me of the principles of conversational hypnosis on a training in Atlanta in the USA, when he spoke to another student and said that trance induction is not necessary for creating hypnotic effects, and that you can create it by simply having a conversation. Can you not? So today we will explore how we can create hypnotic effects with something as simple as the language we use in conversations with each other. But not yet. Let's start and quickly wrap up the structure of this series. So today we will discuss the use of hypnotic language in a coaching conversation, and we will use it to suggest states and ways of thinking to create options and possibilities for our clients, and to help them find solutions and overcome their problems at the same time. Hypnotic language is simply a set of linguistic patterns to guide people into a reflective state. It is a way of communicating with your client's extended consciousness, which includes both the conscious and the unconscious, by turning attention inward through conversation. In this session, we will discuss considerations you should pay attention to when you create conversational trance. We will discuss the Milton model and what it is about, how you can learn hypnotic language patterns, how you can use it, and how you would prepare for a hypnotic coaching conversation. And then, what will happen next week? I don't know. Because this is the end of our current series of conversations. But it's not the end of your journey of learning. You have learned so much over the last 8 weeks, which means you have a robust platform from which you can build many new skills and capabilities. So let's start this last session with the promise of more. Anytime we talk about creating trance, whether it's conversational trance or conventional trance, it is crucial to evaluate if trance is a good idea. It is essential in our coaching intake interviews or with the completion of intake forms that you confirm the medical history of your coaching clients. And we do this to identify any known afflictions or conditions they might have. People that should not be entranced are some of the following. Firstly, people under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Drugs and alcohol create an altered state, and people under the influence may act unpredictably or irrationally when you induce trance for them. We also avoid entrancing people prone to fits and seizures. And by fits, we mean people that are subject to tantrums and uncontrolled social displays. When we talk about seizures, we refer to people with medical conditions like epilepsy. The reason for this is that emotional states and situations may trigger fits and seizures. And in trance, we often access those states. Another group is pregnant women. They should not be entranced in coaching sessions. Although hypnosis is an excellent tool to manage symptoms of pregnancy and the actual process of birth, we don't want to create states in which someone could hurt themselves or their child by doing something in trance that generally would be inconsequential. We also avoid creating trance in people with pre-existing injuries and those with psychological conditions and mental disorders. And apart from those, just use your good judgment. If you are not sure about your client, or if you are not sure that trance would be beneficial to them, don't do it. And then lastly, take a look in the mirror. As a professional coach, don't experiment on your clients. Master your skills in a training situation or in a practice group before you use it in your professional setting. An ill-advised or improperly used hypnotic technique may harm your reputation and your brand irreparably. The lineage of hypnosis techniques that I was trained in is that of Ericksonian hypnosis. Ericksonian hypnosis is a specific type of hypnosis which is characterized by the use of indirect suggestion, metaphor, and storytelling, as opposed to direct and authoritative suggestion techniques that's typically used in clinical settings. Ericksonian hypnosis was named after Dr. Milton Erickson, who was a prominent American psychiatrist and psychologist, and to this day, many still regard him as the father of hypnotherapy. He grew up on his parents' farm in Wisconsin in the United States of America, And the influence of that environment created a foundation for his storytelling, as he often used the farm in stories and metaphors. At the early age of 17, he was paralyzed with polio. It left him with extreme bouts of pain throughout his life, and he adopted a self-hypnosis routine to manage the pain effectively. After graduating and completing his training, he went on to become the clinical director at the University of Arizona in 1948. He left 1 year later to start his private practice, partially due to paralysis, which had confined him to a wheelchair. In practice, he would hypnotize himself during client sessions to increase his awareness and listening skills so that he could listen to his clients at a much deeper level. Self-hypnosis by a therapist then and now is still considered controversial. His work and his approach was well known in clinical circles at the time, but it was not until 1973 when a former student of his, Jay Haley, published a book with the title Uncommon Therapy that Erickson became famous to the rest of the world. He began offering seminars to teach the principles of his work until he died in 1980. Many of his techniques are not what we might consider hypnotic, but it does create trance states where we find unconscious resources and choices. Richard Bandler, John Grinder, and others created the Milton model in neurolinguistic programming after studying how Dr. Milton Erickson achieved the results he did. The Milton model focuses on three simple aspects. First, there's rapport. With rapport, we aim to build an empathetic connection with our client. And we do this with verbal communication and other techniques. Rapport builds trust and it opens up a foundation for effective communication with our client. Then the second aspect is about overloading conscious attention. By distracting the conscious mind with vagueness and ambiguity, we bypass the conscious mind and we can open the unconscious mind to change. And then the third aspect is indirect communication. Clients can meet direct orders or direct suggestions in one of two ways, either with acceptance or dismissal, and more often, direct suggestion or direct orders will be dismissed outright by your client. Indirect suggestion is much more subtle, and it's a more successful way to invoke change because it engages deep thinking and reflection with your client. And often, decisions and actions are taken after a period of reflection. And that period might even extend to beyond the session that you have with the client. Then we combine these three aspects with simple language patterns. And we use these language patterns in stories, in metaphors, and of course in gentle suggestion. And I'm going to share some of these language patterns with you today, but I want to caution you that these are not an extensive coverage of the Milton model or indeed all of the language patterns that Milton Erickson became famous for. And I'm going to very quickly talk you through the Milton model. I'm simply just going to refer to the different language patterns and give you an example of each. And then towards the end, I will put it together so that you could see how it might be used in a conversation or not. So the first pattern is mind reading. And mind reading is simply claiming to know the thoughts or the feelings of another person without necessarily referring to how you know. So it's almost like you are reading their mind. So you would have a statement that starts with words like, I know that you are wondering. And to be honest, there's no way that I could know if you were wondering about something. But if I say something like that, you may start to wonder how I know that you are wondering. Then the second pattern is the lost performative, where you're sharing a value judgment on someone or something, but you are not saying who's doing the judging. And an example of that is, and it is a good thing to wonder. Then we move to cause and effect. Cause and effect typically creates a link between two things so that one is seen to be causing the other. And here we typically look at words like because, makes, if, then, as you, then, since. So we often use this to combine different suggestions for our coaching clients. So I can, for example, say, you are focusing on your goals because you want to increase the skills that will eventually get you promoted. And there might be no link between those two things that I shared, except for the fact that I tied them together with a cause and effect statement. And by doing that, I'm creating the possibility in my client's mind that this cause and effect is a possibility that is available to them. Then we go to complex equivalence, and this is when we try and bring two things together as equal. And an example is the words that means. So I can say, for example, this morning it was colder than usual, and that means it must be winter. So that's an obvious truism. I could also take a totally illogical series of statements and tie them together as a complex equivalence, and I could, for example, say, this morning was colder than usual, and that means that global warming doesn't exist. It was just a terrible example of a horrible untruth. But it shows how effective complex equivalences are, because you can tie things together that under no logical circumstances belong together. And of course, the upside of this is that we can create for our clients connections between parts of what they want in their life in such a way that they can see one thing as being the same as something else. So I can, for example, suggest to a client, the fact that you show up on time every morning means that you respect your employer. And that would be the kind of statement that you would give to someone that is really focused on being punctual, being visible, and want to feel valued by the employer. Then we get to presuppositions, and this is where we're stating something as if it is true. So as you are listening to me, you are learning many things. And often in the Milton frame of mind, we keep it as ambiguous as that. Because what happens is it allows the client to fill in any gaps that we are not expressly communicating. So from their experience, from what they know, they will seek to find meaning in the words that we say. And the only way that they can find meaning is to fill in the gaps of what we are saying with their own experience, with their own knowledge, with their own values. Then we get to universal quantifiers, and these are generalizations that don't necessarily specify who or what you are referring to. And an example here is, and all the things that you may hear tonight will have value. Then we get to modal operators, which are words of possibility or necessity. And this is where you find words like can and can't, should, shouldn't, must, mustn't, will, won't, and more. Then we get to nominalizations, and nominalizations are verbs or processes that have been frozen in time by turning them into nouns. If I understand something, I am nominalizing my understanding. So I'm taking the verb of understand and I'm creating something that is fixed in time, because an understanding of something exists at a specific point in time. So we can use examples like provide you with new insights and new understandings. Then we get to unspecified verbs or unspecified predicates, and these are verbs that don't specify the action that we are taking. So I can say, for example, and you can wonder. And I'm not telling you about what or what you are going to do with what you are wondering about. And then often what we'll do is we throw in a tag question in there, and I've done that a couple of times today already. But a tag question is a question that is added after a statement, and it's designed to displace resistance. So I could say, for example, and you can wonder, can't you? And this is a very, very effective tool to overcome resistance. But I can, for example, think of my old friend John, and I can say to John, but John, you are such a nice person, aren't you? And if you imagine for a moment that I asked you that question about you, what is your natural response? So a tag question is a very effective way to overcome resistance and reach agreement. Then there's the lack of referential index, where we use phrases where the subject is not a specific person or thing. And an example is one can, you know. So I'm not specifically saying who. I'm not specifically saying what. Then we get to comparative deletions. And that is when we have a comparison to something or someone, and we don't identify the something or the someone. And I can say, for example, and it's more or less a right thing. I'm not saying according to who or according to what. Then we get to a pacing current experience. And pacing current experience is very useful if you want to lead your client in a certain direction, because it starts with something that is true for the client. And then you build what we call an agreement set. And an agreement set is basically someone saying yes, then they saying yes again, and then they saying yes again, and then you lead them in a direction, and now the pattern of saying yes perpetuates itself, and they feel like the fourth thing should be a yes also. And let me give you an example of that. And you can maybe imagine that I'm talking to you personally. As you are sitting here, listening to me, focusing on the screen in front of you. So there I've made 3 statements, and all 3 of those statements were true, and they evoked agreement in you. So if I now want to lead you in a different direction, I could come with a 4th statement and I can say, for example, you are sitting here, listening to me, focusing on the words that I'm saying, and you are wondering about your commitment to achieving your goals. And each of you will have your own experience in your own mind, but this is a very effective way to steer someone towards a certain route if there's a resistance to change. Then we get to double binds, and I like to say a double bind is damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because with a double bind, you offer the illusion of choice. Because you want your client to do something, so you give them this illusion of choice, but it doesn't matter which choice they decide on, they're going to do what you want. So here's a nice example. And that means that you can learn this easily or without any effort at all. It's totally up to you. So there I've given you a wonderful choice on whether you want to learn with no effort or if you want to learn easily. And it's up to you which you want. Then we have a conversational postulate, which is a permissive command that sounds like a question. For example, would you feel more comfortable if your eyes were closed? And then we get to extended quotes. And extended quotes is almost like the story loops that we created when we talked about hypnotic storytelling a week or so ago. And it is something that is designed to create confusion, and by creating confusion, induce trance. And this example I actually used with you in the presencing exercise that we started with this evening. Last week, I was talking to an old friend, John, who reminded me of the principles of conversational hypnosis on the training in Atlanta in the USA, when he spoke to another student and said that the trance induction is not necessary for creating hypnotic effects, and that you can create it by simply having a conversation. Now, on the surface, this looks like a terribly designed sentence, but in fact, what it does is it confuses the heck out of your rational mind, and it opens up your unconscious mind. And of course, once your unconscious mind is open and ready, we slip in the suggestion. It is not necessary to do a trance induction to create hypnotic effects, and you can create it by simply having a conversation. So everything that went before created for us the space to insert that suggestion. Then we get to selectional restriction violations, where we personify an inanimate things, for example, a body part. I wonder how your ears feel having heard such a thing. So we almost consider your ears as being separate from you and have an ability to hear things independently of you. Then some of the ambiguities that we can engage. There's the phonological ambiguity, where you use words with different meanings that sound alike. Here, here, there, there. Sun, sun. And we use that in a spoken way, in such a way to create confusion on what the meaning of what we are saying really is. And the next ambiguity is actually a wonderful example of that, syntactic ambiguity, where we use words with ambiguous syntax and you can't tell which part of the sentence the word applies to. So I can say, for example, they are visiting relatives. So am I talking about someone that is visiting their relatives, or am I talking about relatives that are visiting? Or the second one, speaking to you as a child. So am I referring to myself as a child, or am I referring to you as a child? Then we have ambiguity of scope, where you're not sure what or how much of the sentence a certain word applies to. The old men and women. What do I mean with that? Am I saying there's old men and there's women, or am I saying there's old men and old women? And there's a couple more examples there. Something else that really creates ambiguity is the use of run-on sentences, where you create the sentences in such a way that you are not sure where sentences end or new sentences begin. Like for the example I've got there, I want you to notice your hand me the glass. Or if you're using pauses, I love using pauses. I actually love it so much that my whole speech pattern have changed over the years. And I love the long pause especially. So the example here is, can you please pass out the flyers? Okay, so that was a little bit exaggerated, but if you think about what it is that you are hearing, can you please pass out the flyers? There is interesting meanings in that sentence that you can create purely on how you listen to it. Or incomplete sentences, where you just simply leave a sentence. For example, would you rather go into a nice, deep What happens is, if you are listening to an incomplete sentence, your brain, which is one of the most magnificent meaning-making machines that exist, needs to close that sentence. So if I use an incomplete sentence, your mind or your brain will suggest for you possible words that will complete that sentence. And of course, depending on the word that you insert in there, that sentence then gains meaning for you specifically. Then getting to utilization, and in utilization we use what happens. So for example, if we want to use what a client has said, I can take what they said to me and I can use it to create either trance or suggestions for them. So here's an example. The client says, I don't understand. And I say, that's right. You don't understand yet, because you haven't asked the one question that will create your understanding. Another example is something that happened a few weeks ago in my morning sessions that I run for the South Africans. And in our session, there was an incredible noise just outside my home because the garbage collectors were coming past, and there was a loud truck, and there was the banging of all the garbage cans. So there was this massive noise in the background at the same time that I was busy doing an induction. So now there's two ways to approach it. I can totally lose my focus on the induction, or I can use what is happening, which is what I did. So I said something to them in terms, or something very similar to the following. I said, and as you hear loud noises in the background, it is a sign to your unconscious mind that you should go even deeper into trance. So utilization is one of the most important tools and constructs and language constructs to master. Let's put all of this together, and I've just put a mishmash of all of these phrases into a simple script, which I will share with you in a moment. And what I would like you to do is just to sit back and relax, and you might even want to close your eyes and just notice what you notice about the words. And specifically notice the effect it has on you. So let's put it together. I know that you are wondering. And it's a good thing to wonder, because that means you are learning many things. And all the things that you can learn provide you with new insights and new understandings. And you can wonder, can't you? One can, you know. And it's more or less the right thing. You are sitting here, listening to me, looking at me. And that means that you can learn this easily or without any effort at all. It's totally up to you. Can you feel this is something you understand? Last week, I was talking to an old friend, John, who reminded me of the principles of conversational hypnosis on the training in Atlanta in the USA, when he spoke to another student and said, trance induction is not necessary for creating hypnotic effects, and you can create it by simply having a conversation. You can hear that here. And I wonder how your ears feel having heard such a thing. On the surface, learning hypnotic language patterns may seem complicated, but it's not. Now that you are aware of the different kinds of patterns, you can go and find the language that works best for you, and then you can use it as a foundation to adapt and evolve for your use. For example, I've shared with you 19 different language constructs, and there's some schools out there and there's some authors out there that will actually point out many more hypnotic language patterns. And you don't have to learn all of them. You can maybe start with 2 or 3 language patterns and adapt to them, start using them, and then when it enters into your everyday language, you can then pick up on another one or another 2. But I have some suggestions for you to maximize your learning potential so that you not only learn the basics, but that you also mold and adapt your speaking style. And it's a 4-step process. And let's start with step 1. And step 1 is about mentally rehearsing. With language patterns, your ability to put words in a specific sequence is critical. And you create impact by selecting where and how you put words together. And often you can write the sentence down. And if you start switching the order of the words, the message may remain the same, but the statement becomes a lot more powerful or a lot less powerful. So it's very important to get the word sequence right. And that is more important than how quickly you can learn to speak and how you keep conversations flowing. Now, as you are learning, you will need to mentally rehearse what you're going to say before you say it. And this is best done in many practice sessions. And the intention of the practice sessions would be to master the language patterns. Because once you've mastered the patterns, then you will be able to keep conversations flowing smoothly. The second step is write stuff down. Writing something down is an excellent way to help your brain remember it. So carry a notebook with you, always have a notebook handy. And when you learn something new, write it down. And just the act of writing it down helps you to cement those words and the patterns in your mind for later use. And often what happens is that as you are listening to people, there will be many useful phrases that just crop up. Or if you are serious about learning hypnotic language, when you read scripts or examples of hypnotic sessions, you can quickly identify language patterns that you may want to adopt in your own speaking style. And then, of course, continuously crafting examples of your own. A good way to learn the Milton model is to go and take each of these language patterns and go and create several examples for every language pattern that you want to integrate into your way of speaking. And it may be a struggle at first because you're learning something new, and you might find that your instinct will be to write the samples based on the language patterns you already use rather than the ones that you are learning. But then it's important that you apply your own critical mind and decide whether your way of speaking is already essentially hypnotic or not. Then the third step is to sound it out. So in addition to writing it out and practicing writing your hypnotic language samples, you need to say it out loud and you need to practice it out loud. Unless you also practice saying these language patterns on a daily basis, you will find when the time comes to use it, you'll be tripping over your own tongue and it may sound unnatural. But if you stick with it and you consciously integrate using the language that you come up with, you will find that naturally it becomes a part of your normal speaking patterns. And then, of course, the fourth step is to practice. And a good way to learn this is to start practicing with someone else who has an interest or is learning conversational hypnosis. Or another option is to find someone who's already an expert and to use these patterns with them and let them listen to you and coach you on how to not only use the patterns that you're coming up with, but how to extend and expand them. And then, if you start using your learned language patterns with your everyday interactions, it will naturally lead to you being able to use it fluently in your coaching sessions. And It is important that you don't worry or be disappointed if you sound awkward in the beginning. Over time and with practice, you do start sounding more natural. And people might listen to you and they would think you've got an odd way of speaking, but they will not doubt the phrases that you are using. And that's where we want to get to. Let's go to the next step and focus on how you can design your coaching session after learning how to speak hypnotic language well. Apart from mastering hypnotic language as a skill, there is also a lot of preparation that goes into your coaching sessions. Now, if you are planning to use conversational hypnosis, and remember, this is just one of the techniques that you learned over the past 8 weeks, and you may decide to use it or not. It's up to you. But if you do plan to use it, apart from getting really good at it, there's also a couple of other things that you have to pay attention to. And I'm going to start with rapport. For a persuasive and effective coaching session that relies on your client actively working with you, and of course being open to what you are doing, you must have great rapport. Often, coaches treat the opening part of the session just as a rote exercise or as something that you just do to make the client feel comfortable. And you rush through it as a means to getting to the really important stuff, which is the outcomes and the exploration. I will go a little further and I will say that if you cannot establish deep rapport with your client in the opening part of your coaching session, your session will not be effective. When you are planning to use any hypnotic technique, you must spend more time than you usually would at establishing rapport. Rapport creates and deepens the trust and, more importantly, the empathy that is created between you and your client. And the more trust and the more empathy there is, the more likely your client is to go on an adventure with you. Then we get to the induction. Now, even though you will not do a formal induction with conversational hypnosis, I always plan for some kind of grounding or presencing exercise, which of course is in an induction. And whichever exercise I use, I always make sure to induce an hypnotic or an altered state. Then we get to eliciting states. In the general conversation that you have with your client, whether it's the opening, whether it's the outcomes, whether it's even an exploration, it is vital to elicit the outcomes or the resource states that the client wants and need to achieve their session outcome. And what we do is we then, once we know those resource states and what they involve, we can then use those to craft hypnotic suggestions and affirmations, which we can then feed back to our client to increase their motivation and commitment. And let me give you an example. So let's say we've got a client that wants to be a better communicator. And as a coach, you would ask them, so what would being a better communicator give you? And they might say, it will give me power. And then you might say, what is that like? And they could, for example, say, power is to have confidence in a conversation with my team. Good. You've just unlocked something that your client really wants. And then, as the conversation is continuing, you will keep track of what they shared with you. And then, at an appropriate moment, you could create a suggestion for them, which might sound something like this. As you learn to communicate with your team, you gain power, because having confidence in a conversation is power, is it not? And then the same kind of thinking also applies in eliciting outcomes. By understanding your client's outcome well, you can set that outcome up and you can feed them suggestions linking their actions and their insights to the outcomes and the resource states that they desire to achieve. And it all comes back to feeding back suggestions and affirmations of their outcomes, their actions, and their states all of the time. Feedback and suggestions become really powerful if you can use the keywords as it is suggested by the client. And of course, if you really want to make it powerful, you can support it with the somatic gestures and the voice tonality as it is displayed by the client. Now, for example, if your client says to you, I feel motivated, and when they say the word motivated, they ball their fist and they push it in front of them. You pay notice to that. And you specifically pay notice to the tonality in which they are saying it, and of course the gesture that goes with it. And then at some point, when it's appropriate in the conversation, you can feed it back to them as a suggestion. As you become a more powerful communicator and gain more confidence in team conversations, you will feel motivated. And when you say motivated, you use the same tonality that they used, and you use the same gesture with the fist that they used. So what is happening here is, by following their example, you are tapping into that emotional state that they have when they mention how motivation feels to them. By repeating it in the way that they said it, you are supporting the forming of their neural pathways. And by using the same gesture that they see reflected back to them in the same way that they used it, you are creating a powerful anchor for them. Okay, and all of this then integrates not only the language, but the way it is said and the physical physiology. And then, like with a hypnosis session, we get to the end of the session and we have to reorient the client. And a simple way to do this is to induce and revivify positive and energetic states. And I like to induce states of commitment, of motivation, and energy. Because what I want the client to do is, when they walk out of the door, not only must they be in a really good state, but they must be really filled with motivation to immediately start working on the first actions that will eventually lead to the outcome that they desire. So let's now see how this fits in with our coaching conversation. And over the past few weeks, I've spoken a lot about the structure of a coaching conversation. So I'm going to go through it fairly rapidly, and I'm going to refer mostly only to the work that we've talked about tonight. So in the opening, we focus on gaining rapport and, of course, framing the session. If I run a coaching session where I plan to use hypnotic techniques, I will use as much as a third of the total duration of the session just to gain rapport and, of course, to prepare the client for the work that will follow. And this may include some small talk, catching up with what has happened since the previous coaching session. Then do your induction, either in the form of a presencing or a grounding exercise where it seems like a conscious process, but there's a lot of hypnotic work that is being done. And only when I'm satisfied that the client is in a responsive state and open to entering a conversation with a minimum resistance to change, then I'll proceed to the next step. In the opening, I often pre-frame the session in terms of where I might expect resistance, and I will already start managing it in the opening. I'm not going to wait until I get to a point and then I run into a brick wall. Instead, I will start chipping away at that brick wall in the opening. And often, one of the ways in which I do it is I will share with the client any of the techniques that I'm going to be using with them that they might have to give me permission for, or that they would feel better in giving me permission for. As I mentioned before, the opening is the foundation of all the work that will follow. And it's really important that this part is done right. Then we get to contracting, and this is where we agree on the outcome for the session and make sure that it's achievable within the scope of the session. And we also connect the outcome to meaning and purpose. Often when I start working with a client early on in the relationship, I will talk to them about what their overarching purpose is. And then if the client connects with their purpose well, I will frame every single outcome in each subsequent coaching conversation back to the purpose that guides their life. Once we've agreed on an outcome, I'll often play around with the wording of the outcome to get it in the right kind of shape so that I can utilize it a little bit later for suggestions and affirmations. And in conversation with a client, I would often just change the wording, change the order of the words, and get feedback from them. And when we get to the point where they are happy with the outcome, I will often repeat the outcome 2 or 3 times just to really start that process of engaging with their neural pathways. And in contracting, I'll often start using language patterns to open up the conversational trance state. Then we get to exploring. While you are exploring the outcome, there are plenty of opportunities to elicit and induce different states and suggestions to create possibilities and ideas. And this is specifically where we use hypnotic language constructs to expand our clients' awareness and expand the possibilities that are available to them. And of course, by doing that, creating for them more choice. If you elicit resource states here, it will serve you well when you get to the actioning part where you can then really start piling on suggestions and affirmations for them. In the actioning stage, it is very important to assess every single action that the client comes up with and connect that to any of the states that you've elicited before and make sure that it is aligned with the outcomes. And it's very important to load them with resources in such a way that it becomes really clear for them that each action executed will increase motivation, will increase commitment, will increase follow through. And this is really important because you want them to go away from the coaching session in a really positive and highly motivated state. When the client shares their insights with you, most of that part of the conversation belongs to the client, but there's also lots of opportunities here to slip in more affirmations and suggestions to push them towards really being motivated for their outcome. And then in the closing, this is where we will reorient the client, and this is where we induce very strong and positive states to motivate their behavior and their attitude beyond the session. These hypnotic language patterns that we are talking about are excellent tools for a coach that is focused on expanding their clients' awareness and the possibilities and the ideas, and to bring change in a way that is very easy to accept and implement. And we do that through suggestion, through affirmation, and state management, getting people to the right states. And I would encourage all of you to just go and explore this. Practice it, come up with some of your own hypnotic language constructs, and try it out with someone that is also interested in this kind of work, and become fluent in it, and then start using it with your clients, and just notice what the possibilities are that this opens up for them. And on that note, I just want to say thank you very much for showing up today. And of course, for everyone that has been showing up for this whole series. And I really hope that there was something in there that helped you or gave you some personal growth. And of course, remember that this is just the start. There's plenty of opportunity beyond these sessions to now go and develop skills to bring all of this into practice.